Welcome, everyone. A belated Happy New Year, but Happy New Year nonetheless. And welcome to our debates, and the first one for 2019. And as you know, we run these debates in partnership with the TES. Now, with this series, we've sought to cover the big, long-standing debates within education. And perhaps the mother of all those debates has been the one concerning the place of knowledge and skills within the curriculum. Now, many recent commentaries have moved us beyond crude distinctions between knowledge on the one hand and skills on the other, albeit, of course, those binaries remain live and there are genuine questions to be asked about the role of the school curriculum and the shape of its content. And there is, of course, ongoing controversy, but very pertinent questions to be raised in relation to, for example, Ofsted's interest in the curriculum, the impact of the e-back, and, of course, this ongoing notion of what's loosely termed 21st century skills. Now, the other point is debate continuing about how we can best cultivate not just knowledge, but also understanding, as well as a whole host of other desirable dispositions, from empathy to self-awareness, unbiased judgment, and so on, what taken together we might conceive of as wisdom. So for this evening's debate, we've assembled speakers with a range of perspectives and experiences when it comes to the school curriculum, so that together we can hopefully enhance our own knowledge and understanding of what it takes to develop well-prepared and well-rounded school leavers. Before I introduce our panelists, I'll just do the usual housekeeping announcements, and then I've got a question for you as well. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm sounds, we'll take the doors behind you out onto Bedford Way. Those who can't use the stairs should move to the doors to the audience's left, and a fire marshal will assist you out of the building. For tweeters among you, the hashtag is #IOE Debates. That's all one word, #IOE Debates. And that's also the way that our live stream audience can put comments and questions to the panel. So, the question I was going to ask you, for which I'll need a show of hands, please, is yes or no? A school's role is principally to teach pupils the best of what has been thought and said. Raise hands for yes. A few tentative, okay. And what about no? Oh, okay. We've got a majority, definite majority for no's at the moment, so we'll come back to that at the end of the debate. And to then inform us on this and stimulate our thinking, we've got a brilliant panel, as I've said. Here on my right, we have Peter Hyman. He's formerly a political strategist to Prime Minister Tony Blair. He left the Westminster Village to become a teaching assistant and subsequently trained as a history teacher. From that experience, he published 1 out of 10, From Downing Street Vision to Classroom Reality. In 2012, he founded School 21, of which he continues as executive head. The 4 to 18 school, based in Stratford, was founded with a belief that education must be done differently if it's to prepare young people for the fast-paced world that they'll inhabit. And Peter's also co-director of Big Education, a new organisation that seeks to promote this ethos more widely. And then on my left, David Lambert is Emeritus Professor of Geography Education here at the IOE. He was a secondary head school teacher and deputy principal for 12 years before moving into teacher education. Since then, David spent 5 years as chief executive of the Geographical Association, authored an award-winning school textbook series, Jigsaw Pieces, and been awarded the Royal Geographical Society Taylor and Francis Award for Leadership in Geography Education. His recent books include Knowledge and the Future School and Debates in Geography Education. Then Kat Scutt is Director of Education and Research at the Chartered College of Teaching. Kat's taken her experience as an English teacher and of learning and development in the corporate sector to improve support for teachers' professional development. Her particular interest is in teacher development through collaboration and through engagement with research and evidence. She leads the College of Teachers Chartered Teacher Programme, as well as their research activities and publications, including, of course, their award-winning journal Impact, which some of you will find on your seats. Kat's also studying for her doctorate at the IOE, I'm very glad to say, and that's on school leadership development. And then finally, but certainly not least, Dr. Tony Sewell is CEO of Generating Genius, which works to inspire and support 14 to 18-year-olds to pursue STEM subjects and careers, particularly those young people who are underrepresented in those fields, including girls, Black African and Black Caribbean boys, and mixed-race young people. Tony himself has been a pivotal figure in debates on black masculinities and schooling, while Generating Genius has become a model for understanding how to grow talent from disadvantaged backgrounds. His achievements have been recognised in the award of CBE for services to education and the conferment of honorary doctorates by the universities of Exeter and Essex universities, and just last year, the conferment of an honorary fellowship by UCL. So you can see that we have a brilliant panel of experts here to talk to us, and we're going to start with Tony. Thank you.
Right, I've got the short straw here. Well, good evening, everybody. I'd like to start really with this debate about sort of my own knowledge. I haven't lost my South London accent, thank God, but what that sort of shows you in some ways is knowledge is for everybody in a sense, and I'm going to come at this from a quite personal angle. I think that two things for me formed my appreciation, I suppose, of what I think would be the importance of knowing stuff and giving that to children. They're really by accident, really. Number one is the church, and I say the church in particular, the Church of England, of which I was forced to go to by my mother. I think she just sent us to church, and then we probably pray for her or something like that. And it was an interesting church, but for us, and I think this is an angle I'm going to come at this in a sense of knowledge and how it also impacts class, race, and gender as well. There's some issues going on there with this. For me, it changed my life in a way because I managed to get a good understanding of the Bible, which is an interesting text, whatever we say about it, and it has some of its faults. And then the other thing, by accident, an old retired Latin teacher who used to live next door, and I think I became his sort of experiment in a way. So my mum sent me next door, and I had Latin lessons with this retired teacher. And I used to go there on a Saturday, and we used to just have these lessons. And I took in those days, I'll show you how old I am, I took the O-level Latin, quite young. And what happened was just to take those two things there, and then I want to run straight to my English class at university, surrounded by lots of students from independent schools, and how I could actually beat them up, because I actually managed to go toe-to-toe with them, with all their privileged education, etc. And it was great because literature, in the end, and doing English literature, really you do need the Bible to really get to grips with it, because the texts and the basis of literature, the myths, the stories. I mean, if you're going to, for example, we were doing Milton, and I was all over that text, and I got a really good degree out from that, because I kind of, it's very difficult to penetrate that Paradise Lost and 1 and 2. And if you haven't got the basic knowledge at the first place to go for those texts and understand it. If I just rolled out of my secondary modern, rubbish that it was, without that accidental knowledge, a bit hopeless. But the students that I was with, those independent school students, already had, because they'd gone to their chapels and they'd gone up, so they'd got their Bible and they'd got their classics already in place. I accidentally got my one, you know. And what I want to try and get over here is the notion that I'm almost fighting a different battle here, because like the tree of knowledge for me now is not necessarily about an education that is about, well, is it about more diversity? Is it about a sense of wanting to access texts that are not written by white males, etc.? It's actually the opposite. And actually, I actually feel that I'm fighting for working class children to access the classics. And it's quite interesting that the people who mostly perpetuate the notion that us people who are either in the Welsh valleys or from poor black backgrounds shouldn't have this because somehow it's bad for us or somehow it's going to do us some harm, are actually the people who benefited from that classical education in the first place. And that's the thing that really makes me annoyed about this, because it's almost a liberal kind of thing that, wait a minute, what you should be, Tony, you should, for example, in my house at the moment, I'm quite interested in magic in the 16th century, you know. Now, I'm just interested. If I was going to do another PhD, I'd do it in medieval Scottish poetry, yeah? And you're saying, what's a black man doing that for, you know? Why isn't he going looking at West African literature? Or wasn't he studying Alice Walker or something like that? Wasn't he going to find himself somewhere? Yeah? But he's going to find himself in medieval Scottish poetry. And so what happens is there's almost a kind of reverse racism going on here somewhere in this, in the sense that we are positioned around knowledge, in the sense that there's something we should be studying. It's almost as if I flipped the argument and said women should only just be doing women's studies, you know, because that's good for women, you know. And there's a kind of sense in the whole debate around knowledge that, in fact, it's become an issue for poor kids. What you do is you, first of all, don't give them stuff that isn't related to their backgrounds, number one. And number two, you don't give them difficult stuff. So of course, I created a charity called Generating Genius. Don't worry, I'm watching the time. I created a charity called Generating Genius. And it works in the sense we find bright kids, whatever that means, from poor backgrounds. We work with them and the out-of-school space. And, you know, I look at the perception of, for example, black boys. Most of my boys don't want to do grime music. They want to do algebra. They love doing algebra. You know, I've seen some boys here shaking their heads. I mean, do you know that the expert at the moment in England around bird watching is a little black boy from Hackney? You know, he's the expert on birdwatch. You ask the mayor to come in and give kind of projects around trying to stop knife crime, and he's throwing out grime projects, and he's throwing out. Listen, I could DJ better than some of those boys. Not every black man that walks around can dance, you know. And so the whole idea of knowledge, they should go and do medieval Scottish poetry. They'd actually get more out of it. So my notion around this notion of knowledge and the idea of what you know and what you should know is that really we're talking about, in a sense, knowledge is what you don't know, and it's actually good for you in itself. It's no purpose in it. Latin, I don't know. I didn't do it. What am I going to do with it? I know some Latin. I've forgotten some of it. Those classic texts I know, and I just know them, but they're good for me. It's not going to get me a better job, but education should stop pretending that it can actually build necessarily a workforce. What it's set up for, and that's where universities need to kind of get their act together. What it's set up for is actually for the knowledge in itself, the creativity, the kind of sense of spirituality, actually knowing, dare I say, knowing the mind of God. That's really what education's about. I've got 5 seconds, and I'll leave it there. Thank you. Yeah?
Thank you, Tony.
Right.
That's a brilliant stimulation. Thank you. Peter.
Great. So I'll come at it from a slightly different perspective, knowledge and wisdom. Well, in a nutshell, I might put it like this. Knowledge is needed to pass GCSE exams. Wisdom is knowing that GCSE exams are crap, and but you've probably got to do well in them to get to the next stage. So the question for us is, which do we want? Do we want the first of those or the second? My argument is we need the second. It's not that you don't need the knowledge, and it's not that you don't need to pass the hurdles, but you need the wisdom to put it into some kind of perspective. And so wisdom comes from a mixture of experiences, knowledge, judgment, discernment, and therefore it needs an expansive form of education that is questioning, curious, not just about handing stuff down, but wrestling with that knowledge in order to make sense of it. Now, there is one page at the risk of, this should be on your seat. You are probably sitting on this. So if I can ask you to just have a look at it for a minute, this will explain a bit further my argument. I believe if we go down the route of the question that Becky asked at the beginning, and we didn't collude in this, as it happens, I put the best that's been thought and said as the top left-hand box there. If we go down the route of having an education just based on that, then we are giving people a ninth of an education, in my view. And many children in many schools are getting a ninth of an education. So even within the framework of those who believe in knowledge as the cornerstone of everything, and I'm someone who obviously supports that, but want to go on to say we need more than that, they are doing a third of what I talk about head, heart and hand. I think that's a balanced curriculum. Developing the head is academic, the heart is your character, the hand is being someone who's creative and problem solving. If you just take the head bit, being able to pass on the canon and the classics, which we just heard so eloquently talked about, is of course important and should never be dumbed down for any community or any group of people. And E.D. Hirsch has talked about cultural literacy. Matthew Arnold talked 100 years ago about the best that's thought and said. But you need to do two more things under head. You need to enter into the conversation of humanity and wrestle with big ideas and concepts. So it's not just about nuggets of factual information. It's by entering into the conversation that happens in philosophy or mathematics or history. And it's knowing the contours of those big, broad concepts, ideas, and conversations. And the final one of that column is saying it's also about two things. One is about applying that knowledge, and that's where you get the wisdom. So it's knowing that this knowledge is contestable and applying it to the world that you're in. And it's also, crucially, the combination, the interdisciplinary work. All the exciting stuff going on at the moment, the breakthroughs in different areas of life, are at those intersections of different subjects. It's the interdisciplinary work. If you think about artificial intelligence and the combination of neuroscience and computer science and many other things to produce that new knowledge, it's those intersections and the frictions and the tensions between them that's producing something very rich. So I think a lot of those who go on about a core knowledge curriculum, even on their own terms, are being very, very partial about what they actually mean by that, and therefore doing students a disservice. In terms of heart, wisdom comes absolutely fundamentally from understanding yourself, understanding who you are, understanding your background and how to make sense of it and how to wrestle with that background in the context of the world that you're in. We serve a very diverse community at School 21, this 4 to 18 school in East London. If you're growing up a Muslim girl in East London, you've got multiple identities there as someone Muslim, as someone from East London, as someone who's a girl. And you're trying to make sense of those, some of the pressures that you've got in your community, at home, at school. And growing up and really having the toolkit to navigate that is incredibly important. Understanding others. and being able to work collaboratively with people, and work in teams, but in a wider sense, be able to have a sense of community and build communities is also fundamental to that understanding. And wisdom also comes from a sense of discernment about the world and what's going on in the world. And we all know the debates about social media and what we can trust in terms of news, the fact that more than 50% of people, certainly in the States, and it's coming this way, are only getting their news feeds from something like Facebook, and all that is tailored to exactly what they want to hear or their predispositions in the first place, are debates that we know about. So that discernment and that wisdom is absolutely crucial to fostering young people. That's the heart. Then the hand, I've broken down into 3 areas. One I've called beauty and discernment, which again is absolutely linked to wisdom. And that is about the arts in all its forms, of music, of art, of drama, of having a sense of a sensibility towards them. There's nothing more tragic than the power of the exam factory at the moment and the cramming for exams, that when you give up, when you take your GCSE options in year 8 or year 9, you then stop taking the creative subjects because you haven't chosen to do them. So 95% of people, children in this country, do no music or no art or no drama from the age of 14 because the curriculum's got no space to give it to people, even if they're not taking it as an exam. That's a total national disgrace and tragedy. So the things that we care about in life, the things that make us civilized human beings, are being drilled out of the curriculum and have to be put back in. Learning to create is about all those ways of thinking about how we make, we talk about creating beautiful work at school, and that the currency of a school should not be the exam grades, but the work created. And we've got a fundamental belief that this subliminal message that school is going to be a sort of grinding thing to get through, but you'll get your bit of paper at the end and it'll all be okay once you're 18, but that means 14 years of the grind. We don't believe in that. We believe that you can create meaningful, beautiful work that has value, not just to your teacher or your parents, but to the community and the wider world whilst being at school of any age. That's absolutely fundamental. And also we believe that we're trying to develop people to change the world. And that requires wisdom and judgment. It requires people working on projects. We've got our sixth formers who've developed a charity that's working on homelessness in Newham and is bringing together in the most extraordinary way local homeless charities, local counsellors, working in really imaginative ways to tackle that. But that's something they've set up in a school setting that is making a difference. So if we went in this direction, a curriculum of head, heart and hand, we transcend all these outdated debates about knowledge versus skills. We want a rich, varied repertoire and to develop all those sides of people, because what the world is looking for and what people need for their own fulfillment is that sense of balance in the curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you so much. David.
Thank you. Well, we do live in very, very interesting times. Peter just mentioned about changing the world. As a geographer, and I will be talking to you as a geographer, I think I'm very interested in how we encounter the world and how we understand it before we start wanting to change it. Now, look, given the looming crisis of climate and everything that flows from that, which includes vast human movements across the globe, food and water security issues, and even the disappearance of some countries, we, and I mean the collective global we, need a lot of ingenuity and also wisdom. And I don't think they're necessarily the same things. Intelligence has created the climate crisis. I'll leave that hanging. So look, I'm a great believer in building wisdom. Wikipedia, that great source, defines wisdom as the ability to think and act using knowledge, experience, understanding, common sense, and insight. And I'm happy with that. And it leads me to my great note of caution. having said I'm a great believer in education building wisdom, I am very, very cautious about it because it's not all to do with school. Mainly, I'm cautious about overclaiming what education on its own can do, especially in the contemporary context in England, where the very idea of education has been weakened and undermined, as Gerd Biester was saying here 1 year ago in this very room. And that's happened since education, I think, became increasingly an arm of national economic policy in the latter part of the last century. So I'm cautious, but I'm also cautious about another aspect of the question we're considering, which is the use of the word main objective. From my thinking, hard thinking over many years about the curriculum, I'm nervous about the use of objective in this context. Objectives are usually discrete, they're measurable, and often short-term. Lessons can have objectives. Examinations have assessment objectives. So I prefer to see objectives as staging posts. I mean, wisdom is not an objective for me. Objectives are staging posts towards something less tangible, a more open curriculum goal, which indeed could be wisdom. So what about wisdom, or something like it, serving as our overarching curriculum goal? If not a goal, at least an approach to thinking about the curriculum, its purpose and its value to students. And then it becomes very similar to capabilities in the way that I've used it with colleagues in the Geo-Capabilities project, which you can find out more about from the postcard on your seats. This approach, in my view, must apply to individual subject components of the curriculum. If not, building wisdom may simply remain warm words in a school prospectus or a government policy or something. In other words, all teachers, geography teachers, science teachers, RE teachers, art teachers, all teachers need to do something with the idea if wisdom is going to be our overarching curriculum goal. Teachers need to take responsibility for the curriculum as it's enacted with students. That means making choices about what is taught, and indeed thinking hard about why this is justified in the first place. And only then start to think about how it's being taught. Teachers need to take responsibility for how content is sequenced and how they think students progress in that content. In other words, to use a phrase, teachers need to take back control. Because teaching somebody else's interpretation of what is significant in this or that subject is, in my view, inadequate. To use the popular current phrase which has been referred to already, being knowledge rich in a school is not enough. Teachers need to be in the business of knowledge building, not knowledge delivery. And Kevin Collins, also in this hall 1 year ago in the same debate as Gerd Biester, said something which really caught my attention. He was making a point about his belief in what he called empowered practitioners. He said, we're a long way from that. We have too many compliant practitioners. There is a culture of compliance. This is a complete turnaround from what we need in empowered practitioners. Now, he was talking about what works in classrooms, the how. I'm talking about something even more fundamental, which is the curriculum, the what. For me, this goes to the heart of what it means to be a teacher of science or geography of art. The potential of knowledge building in contributing to the building of wisdom. And this is why the Capabilities Project, which I referred to, makes use of the three futures heuristic that Michael Young originated some 8 years ago. And I just want to make two distinctions in this heuristic. he distinguishes future one, which is where knowledge is inert, it's pre-selected, pre-decided knowledge, pre-packaged for effective delivery, in a what every child needs to know E.D. Hirsch kind of way, focused heavily on knowing that. It suggests scripted lessons, and it certainly suggests compliance. Future one has no part to play in geocapabilities. We're interested in a much more dynamic view of knowledge, where both teachers and students are in different ways engaged with the knowledge. In a way that of course includes knowing that, but from Chris Winch, two forms of knowing how. That means firstly the procedures within the subject which are applied to the knowledge so that the knowledge gains warrant. It's how do we know we've got the best knowledge? And secondly, the conceptual systematicity that all good knowledge has, how it's connected and how it builds towards a greater understanding. So in conclusion, I think in these very interesting times, we need to build wisdom. But in education, there are no guarantees. But on the other hand, education is all we had, and all we have. And I just want to leave you with the idea, imagine young people who were able to think geographically about the Anthropocene and how it might enhance their thinking and engage with that as a real issue of the day.
Thank you so much. And Kat, the last word.
Great, thank you. I'm more typically sitting at the back of this hall during PhD lectures trying to make sense of complicated statistics than I am at the front, so it's been an absolute pleasure to be asked to be here tonight. Those of you who've met me before will know this is kind of my typical way, that I'm probably going to ask more questions than I'm going to answer here, but hopefully some that will provoke some interesting reflections. I think when I saw the title of this evening's lecture, my first question was whether we can develop pupils who are wise. We discussed this briefly on the way down here, that there's a way in which we see sort of wisdom as being something which is associated with experience, with age, with something that you develop over time and only as being a product of that. So I think there was an immediate question for me of whether you would ever imagine an 18-year-old leaving your school as someone who you could truly consider to be wise. And I think there was a second question around that for me as well, which was whether wisdom is an individual thing or whether what we're actually thinking about is building the collective wisdom of our culture, of our society. And that's really what we're thinking about. We're thinking about pupils leaving school with the potential to become wise, with the potential to contribute, to be part of that collective wisdom. But I think what we're primarily thinking about tonight is more this question of really, when we're talking about pupils being wise in schools, we're thinking about pupils who are able to think critically, who have good judgment, who can make good decisions, who have really strong content knowledge, but also are able to engage effectively with others, to share that, to develop and to build all sorts of skills and knowledge for their lives. And I think there's also a question that we can debate, is it about knowledge and skills? And we can say, are these important? And of course, I think most people will say, yes, we need people to leave with both knowledge and skills. So really the debate comes down to a question not of whether these matter or which matters more, but how we develop those. So it's not just about curriculum, it's not just about outcomes, it's also thinking about pedagogy. And I think it's quite difficult to sort of separate those. David, you went some way into explaining that process we need to go through when we're thinking about what is it that we teach, but then moving into the how do we teach that. And when we want students to develop both knowledge and skills, how do we develop those skills? So if we're thinking about that, when we're designing a curriculum as a teacher or as a school leader, are we thinking about this is our curriculum and these are the things we want our pupils to know? Are we thinking this is our curriculum and these are the things that we want our pupils to be able to do in a sort of procedural knowledge way, or are we thinking about that in a soft skills way? I think often when the debate is most polarised when people talk about skills and knowledge, what they're talking about when they talk about skills is those almost indefinable, intangible and sometimes conveniently hard to measure skills, rather than the sort of subject-centred skills that, again, I think are part of everyday teaching. And I think there's an important question for me about the recognition we've got that the skills that we want people to develop, those soft skills, oracy, working as a team, collaboration, can actually be developed through quite traditional knowledge-centered teaching methods. We might be thinking more about, actually, it's not just if I let you guys work in a group, then you'll have figured out by the end of that how to collaborate, and that's lovely, that's all I need to do. There's actually a huge amount we can do in terms of teaching young people how to debate, discuss, share, how to take responsibility for working in a group. And if we don't do those things, that's when we see the sort of problems that have emerged with really ineffective group work that's been quite challenged over the past few years. So I think a lot of the time when we're debating the skills and knowledge ideas, we need to be thinking just as much about whether it's a question of pedagogy as curriculum. How do we design both a curriculum and then an associated pedagogy that builds the knowledge and the skills we want our young people to have when they leave the school? So I think that's a really important sort of question to explore when we're thinking about knowledge and skills. And I think it's also worth reflecting on why it's become such a polarised debate, because when we read sort of tonight's session description, it sort of says, well, actually, yes, most of us probably do agree that we need a bit of both of those. I think there's relatively few people who would say, well, you don't need any skills at all when you leave school, and relatively few people who would say, yes, well, don't worry about the knowledge. You can look that up on Google. I know that's a sort of commonly used phrase, and yet I don't think I've ever met a single teacher who thinks there's no point teaching anything because you can just look it up on Google. You end up in those scenarios. There was one recently where there was a sort of, I think it was probably a fake homework that a pupil had done where they'd done some research about Drake, who was simultaneously an explorer and a musician. It was probably one of the most mixed career CVs I've ever seen. Of course, you need underpinning knowledge and critical thought to be able to engage with with how to use technology, how to use access to the internet as well. But there really aren't that many people who are sitting at either end of the debate. What, again, that question is about is how do we get those knowledge and skills? What's the best way to do that? And I think there's also a fundamental underpinning question there. The assumption this evening is that wisdom is the thing that we're aiming for, but there does still remain quite substantial debate in the sector about what the purpose of education is, what success looks like. We've had reference to exam results already this evening, that are they just a thing that you have to do along the way? Are they the end in themselves? And there is debate about that, and I think it's important that there's debate about that. There should be discussion about that. I was quite intrigued by a tweet recently which was about a research report that had shown that a particular method didn't lead to better financial outcomes for pupils in the future. And sort of somewhere down the research report it said, well, the ones that did this were a bit happier at the end though. But there was a kind of, that was almost the sort of the less important bit, that actually fine, if they're not having the most successful careers, the fact that they're happier, that doesn't really matter. And of course, that's a very particular perspective. What is it that we want our children to have when they leave school? And that will vary for different teachers, and I'll come back to that point when I sort of wrap up. And so we see this pendulum, and I think that's part of the reason that we see debate being so polarised. I trained as a teacher during a time when there was a very strong focus, it would be fair to say, on skills-based learning, on group work, on things like that. I have a particularly vivid recollection of training to be an English teacher and trying to develop something to really engage my pupils, and I made a jigsaw puzzle out of persuasive terms. I have no idea what I thought this was going to do, but I also strongly recall getting an outstanding lesson grading for that particular observation. Thankfully, those individual lesson gradings also been lost with time. But I can see how that's the sort of thing that when you go down that route that's being presented as good practice, you suddenly have everyone thinking, okay, we need to do things like that when Ofsted come to visit. And you end up in this bizarre situation when the focus is on activities like that and trying to sort of engage pupils in group jigsaws rather than actually engaging them in really high quality learning. And that leads to this kind of pendulum swing in the other direction. And there's a risk there that we end up going too far in the other direction, and maybe eventually that pendulum slows down and we end up somewhere slightly settled in the middle. But at the moment, it feels like it's swinging quite dramatically from side to side. And I think that's a really important question as we see Ofsted being more and more involved in debates around curriculum, which is a really positive thing to see. But they have a really important and careful role to play there to make sure that they're not encouraging that pendulum swing, that we're not just moving from people saying, oh, well, I read an Ofsted report where they saw inquiry learning and they liked it, so we're all going to do that, to now being like, well, I read an Ofsted report where they liked the knowledge-based curriculum, so I don't really know what that is, but we're going to all do it, okay? All right, core curriculum, core knowledge from tomorrow. There's a real risk if that's the approach that's taken. And so what I think is really important, and certainly what we're looking at the Chartered College, is that it's about teachers not being told this is what you should be doing and this is how, but being given the wisdom, really. Actually, it comes back to this question of wisdom, the knowledge, the sources of information to allow them to make good decisions. And what we hope that Ofsted will be looking for is schools to be able to explain this is what our curriculum is and this is why. It's really important that schools are reflecting on the key debates, as David talked about. What are we teaching? Who are these authors that we're teaching? Why are we teaching those and how are we teaching them? But I think we can encourage schools to do that by encouraging them to be able to explain and engage in really critical debate about that, rather than by telling them that this is what you must be doing. And that's really the focus of my organisation, the Chartered College of Teaching, that whole idea of empowering teachers to be able to make effective decisions, to have the resources, the information that they need to make decisions about the curriculum that's right in their school with their pupils, building on the best research, building on their own experience as teachers, and also building on really robust evaluation of what's working in their own practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, that's terrifically stimulating and has certainly lived up to my expectation of a really thoughtful set of inputs that don't simply revisit the binaries, but have given us a lot of material to think about. I'm very interested that we've had two sort of anti-human capitalist interventions, thinking about the merit of knowledge in its own right and academic scholarship in its own right, which is pertinent even in higher education debates at present. We've had the call for a more expansive approach to education, head, heart and hand, and the importance of interdisciplinary work. We've had thoughts again about the need for greater professional engagement and autonomy, not compliance, which has become a theme that's developed through the inputs. And Kat, of course, has brought us back to the question of how. And again, her plea for this avoidance of the pendulum always swinging too radically. But again, making this point about empowering teachers and a plea for sort of engagement and autonomy for teachers there. Now, Kat also mentioned the point about Ofsted, and of course, in the British environment, it's been particularly true that autonomy and accountability have often been in tension, leading to a potential compliance culture. So I'm just wondering if I can start with the first question to Peter about his views of the Ofsted turn to the curriculum.
I think it's good. It's hard to know exactly the motives at the moment, but I think it's good if they're looking for a broader curriculum. I mean, that has to be a good thing. Actually, earlier today, I was listening to an Ofsted person saying exactly that they are now going to mark down schools that are just exam factories and have narrowed everything else down in order to get just to maximise the exam results. So, you know, if that happens genuinely, I think that is a good move, because we've got to start having broader outcomes. The trouble is all the incentives are still aligned to GCSE results and everything else. So they're twin problems, the assessment system and Ofsted. You know, and Ofsted might be reforming a bit. There's a debate whether it should exist at all anymore. And the exam system is a total problem in terms of any form of expansive education.
Thank you very much. Well, on that note, I think we should very much turn to you, the audience, and invite your questions. As usual, if you can introduce yourself before you ask your question, and keeping questions succinct will allow more of them as well. So, hands from anyone who's interested in asking a question. So I'll take the questions in clusters as usual. We've got a person with their hand up at the back, and then a gentleman at the front in the audience here.
Hi there, Will Goldsmith, assistant head in school in Hammersmith. Just a quick question, maybe for Peter, but it could be for anyone really. There's some discussion about whether GCSEs should exist at all. If that's the case, what should replace them?
Thank you very much. Sir.
My name is Junior Dankwa. I'm in Year 12, a sixth form student. Whilst young people are pressured into studying STEM subjects via the education system, I also feel as if parents possess a role, as parents with a more traditional viewpoint are more likely to pressure their children into studying STEM subjects based on what they think is best for them.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your question. So I guess that we're starting with whether GCSEs should exist at all. And I'm going to turn to David for that. And then we've got the question about parental expectation and pressure, which would be interesting to hear Tony's views, I think.
I really don't see the point of GCSEs anymore. GCSEs were, I suppose, the legacy from the school leaving exam at 16. I don't think many pupils leave school at 16 anymore, so I really don't see the point of them. They're hugely expensive, and as several of us have been suggesting, they tend to distort the educational process somewhat, so long as there are league tables and high stakes results. But what should replace them? I guess teacher assessment, which leads me to a wider point, which you'll not be surprised I want to make, given my initial remarks, which is, I believe one of the big issues that we face is a lack of public trust and political trust in the teaching profession. I'm saying teachers should take a lot more responsibility for what goes. Teachers, not head teachers, teachers should take a lot more responsibility for what goes on in the classroom. But I'm nervous about just saying I want complete teacher autonomy because there's a lack of trust. If teachers take more responsibility, then I think they would need a lot of trust investing in them and a lot more support.
Thank you very much. And Tony, Parry.
Yeah, I think on the parental side, I mean, there's a tension here with this, because obviously a lot of teachers sort of really kind of try and lobby for more parental involvement, and we kind of are really happy when that happens. However, I suppose this is the sort of, to use a stereotype, the helicopter parent that gets over the child too much, and I think that there is an issue there. And you mentioned STEM as an area. For example, I do think there should be a sense really where the parents may want to step aside sometimes from this, and particularly when we're thinking of subject choices at university or even at A-levels, where not everybody is going to end up as a doctor. And I do think this has been an issue for some schools, and that there are a range of other subjects that you can do. And also the notion of subjects, I mean, the reality is, and this is about knowledge as well, is that, this drive to actually subjects that end up with a real job at the end of it, that notion we probably need to challenge more, because there is again this idea that education in terms of having an intrinsic value is the thing that I think parents need to get their heads around.
Thanks, Tony. Kat, did you want to join in?
Yeah, I suppose just a point that sort of draws those together in a way. I think it's interesting if we sort of take step back from the system and where we are with the system now to that question of what our whole schooling system looks like and our approach to subjects and the points at which we narrow those down, which is so tied in with the exam system, but then actually drives the sorts of things that I think was being talked about in the second question, that students and parents are having to make choices at different points about what subjects they continue with, those they drop. We talked earlier about that sometimes driving to people dropping the arts and then not having engagement with those. And I think there's this kind of ongoing challenge to which there's not a simple answer about this question of sort of broad and shallow or narrow and deep, and actually where wisdom comes with that is wisdom this kind of, does that come from breadth of experience, breadth of knowledge, breadth of subjects, or does that come from really, really deep knowledge in one more narrow subject area? What are the points that we should be encouraging students to be keeping a really, really broad curriculum? And that's where I think, again, this Ofsted engagement is really interesting and could drive some really interesting change and reflection there.
Thank you. And please.
Yeah, we need a revolution in this area. I mean, there are more schools than you would imagine up and down the country, secondary schools, where you're basically doing a 5-year GCSE run-in. There's no Key Stage 3 and 4 anymore. You start in Year 7. My children at their local school in Year 7, you go to parents' evening and they're giving them a GCSE grade at the start of Year 7. and working backwards in that way. So so there isn't really a curriculum anymore in the secondary school. What there is a series of exam syllabuses worked back from. So it's totally detrimental to a decent education. As David said, it's part of a school leaving a sort of old hangover from that. Do we need to replace it with anything? Probably not. You probably need a literacy and numeracy check at 16 and more regularly than that. But technology over the years, and I think a lot of good thinking, is going to get to a position which we should at least think about carefully, where you take exams a bit like you would with sport or music when you're ready for it. No one says everyone has to take grade 3 violin or whatever the instrument is exactly at the same age at 16, do you? You take it when you're ready to do it. And it's not beyond us now, people to take a series of qualifications at different points in their school life that make sense. But as Kat says, a lot of it's driven by the requirements of university, where the sort of break in the system starts. Everything works back from the dysfunctions of university, which is a whole separate debate and discussion.
But a very pertinent one, of course. And I think, interestingly, the focus on GCSE credentials in this case also relates a little bit to the parental input, parental engagement and parental capability, because, as we know, the shadow education system, tutoring and so on, is absolutely sort of exploding internationally, but certainly nationally. And of course, you know, there's a relationship there with who can pay. So increasingly, I think the pressure on exam results and credentials will see an ongoing issue of, you know, social inequality and outcomes, and how schools start to address that is really important as well, I think. So I think the two, you know, credentials, parental engagement, and issues around financial, social, and cultural capital are all closely related, actually. Thank you for your
Can I
question.
just make one other point on that? Schools and universities are not waking up to the fact that employers are moving on in quite rapidly. So the 4 big accountancy firms, the KPMGs and PwCs, they're all now CV blind. They're not looking at degrees or A-levels because they're interested, A, in more diversity, and B, in who you are as a person and what skills you bring. So we're colluding in a system that's basically running its course, which is we pat our own children on the head as parents and say, well done, you got all A's at school and you've now got your 2-1 from university. And young people are blinking into the sunlight looking for a job and being turned down by companies that wanted more than just those bits of paper. So we've got to wake up to that because things are changing quite fast.
Let's have another round of questions. Lots of hands going up now. So I saw this hand coming up very quickly. There's a lady here at the front, and we'll go next to the lady behind in the red jumper. I can see other hands, and I'll come to you next.
Thank you. My name is Ibrahim. I'm a PhD student in IOE. So how can we balance between education for knowledge, education for building wisdom, with the pressure that it's putting from international organizations such as OECD, World Bank, who's pushing and who's leading the decision-making in education, that education should be for the market, education should be for economy. Therefore, the focus and the pressure that they are putting on the government in order to transfer education to be mostly focusing on science and math. So how can we balance between these two things?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good question.
My name is Xing. I'm also a student here in IOE. What I want to ask is actually a follow-up question for the first round of question. When we talk about GCSE and talking about how, and Professor Lambert talked about how we can use teacher assessment to replace that. And I was wondering if so, what can policymakers and academians do to rebuild the trust in teachers? How can we support the teachers learning to balance their professional wisdom in teaching and assessment?
Thank you. And then the lady behind.
Hi, thank you. My name is Charlotte Mendel and I work in children and young people's mental health services. And I was curious, exam stress and and kind of this drive for knowledge seems to be one of the leading causes of poor emotional well-being at the moment. And I was curious about where emotional intelligence kind of falls within this debate.
Thank you very much. Really intriguing questions. To start with, I think to answer the question about the dilemma between education for wisdom but the pressure on a human capitalist approach, can we have your view on that, Kat?
Yes, I think it's a really difficult one, and actually it felt like it flowed quite well from Peter, what you were just talking about there, that there is this kind of sense of what is it that that companies are wanting, and there's a really interesting balance, I think, with the kind of 21st century skills agenda, where people are saying, oh, well, these are what 21st century skills are, these are what employers are looking for, which is being quite widely challenged, that actually those are not skills that are just 21st century skills, those are the same skills that we've been looking at always, and again, that question about how we develop those is really important. But also then what's going on in schools, certain subjects being recognised as being more valuable than others, because as we've already talked about, they might lead towards particular jobs. And I think there's a really, really important role for education to play in actually fighting back against some of those pressures and saying, actually, this broad and balanced curriculum, again, that's why it's positive to see Ofsted focusing on that, is really important, that it's not about just selecting the one pathway that's going to take you to the most highly paid job or the jobs in which there are the greatest shortages. If that's the role that you want to go into, then that's fantastic. But there is a whole breadth of wisdom that we need to ensure is retained, and that if we narrow things too much, then we'll start to lose some of that breadth and some of that absolute joy of education, of what it is and what it means to be a lifelong learner. So I think it's very difficult when you see all of these pressures coming on schools, but I think it is almost something that is at the heart of what it means to be a teacher, to recognise the breadth that we need to make available to children and young people, and to fight to protect that.
Thank you, Kat. And then addressing the question about how do we encourage trust in teachers. David?
It's a really, really difficult question, that, for me, because I think it's a very long-term answer, because in a way teachers have to earn that trust as well. So there is a sort of a chicken and egg situation. Somehow it's got to start, though, and I think it starts with teachers being asked to take more responsibility for the quality of the contents of the lesson and the course and the curriculum. I think this links to the Ofsted curriculum turn in a way, because I'm very much in favour of it, but I'm very anxious that the curriculum isn't just spoken about as broad and balanced in a whole school sort of way. We have to get down to the quality of the experience that the children have and the quality of the curriculum in terms of how children progress through it. And if you vest responsibility for that with teachers, then teachers have to assess it, because no one else can. I mean, the teacher knows what he or she is trying to achieve. And so you have to trust teachers in the end, but I can see this is a very, very long-term vision. And a lot has to be in place before it happens. But I'll just emphasise that teachers really do have to earn it as well as be given it.
Thanks, David. And Peter, can you address the question about mental health?
Yes, I mean, you talked about emotional well-being, and that's why we put at School 21 so much emphasis on the heart bit of head, heart and hand, because these three things need to genuinely be in balance, and we need to work in sophisticated ways with students to gain that self-confidence and a sense of identity and who they are, and work with them in collaboration with others. So it's a vital strand. I mean, lots of people talk about character education. There are lots of different views on this. There are lots of different ways of doing it, and people have got different approaches, but it's absolutely essential. And obviously, if you deal with the exam system as well, then you've removed one of the huge pressures that is causing some of these issues. But we shouldn't be under any illusions. There's a whole series of issues, social media and various other things that are contributing to it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'm in a parallel universe here, but I mean, I must admit, I take issue with a lot of my colleagues on the panel here. I mean, you're so pessimistic. I mean, take specifically London and London schools and the exam regime, we would call it the exam regime, the massive improvement that has been in those schools. I mean, I can remember a time where some of those schools, particularly in Hackney, the worst education borough in Europe, deemed always that. And now to go into some of those schools and to go into some of those classrooms and see the students and what they're producing and how they're working, I mean, it's just a world away from, and we're talking really about a time phase of about 10, 15 years, the massive improvement that's happened. And that has been under, dare I say, a regime where exams have been important. Now, I didn't do very well in exams. I tried my best, and I was lucky maybe in some of them. But I don't actually get a sense from those students that that's the thing that's hanging them up, actually, in terms of being unhappy. And I think the other issue about this is the idea that employers need. There's something else that's worrying me in this, is that the traditional way in which we're positioning education, who is working for KPMG? Who is actually getting these law jobs? Who's actually running the parliament? They are people who have come out of those 5 independent schools around London that get into Oxbridge. So what is their curriculum? What do they do in terms of exams? And so and nobody's really from that, and you're all right about money, but in terms of what the knowledge issue is in those schools, they're doing a traditional curriculum. So,
but you can't be saying it's not enough.
But you're saying that the issue is here, is that those companies are still employing the same people. And when we talk about the arts, who is dominating national theatre? Who is dominating the fields of arts in this country? 60% of them are coming from independent schools.
But
we've got a whole issue here of, oh yeah, so aren't they expressive or not? Yeah, they've got a traditional education. What's happened there? How have they got that?
I think that point is really well made, and again, it comes back to that question about broad and balance, doesn't it? Because I think
it comes back to actually, Becky. It comes back for this kind of liberal kind of perspective on this that sees basically working class people basically not able to take on those exams because they're too hard, and that's really what's going on. And we're not giving the children enough challenge. We're not giving them enough high expectation to really deliver. We've proved that in London. That if you focus on that, that delivers the results. That's why those kids are doing well. And I just think that there's a whole politics around this. It doesn't want to look. I don't mind the kids being creative. In fact, those independent schools are creative, but they're probably creative outside of the curriculum. And so what we need to do is challenge those schools to be creative in clubs, in things outside of the curriculum, to enrich it, to enrich the experience, but not dumb down the curriculum and not say that exams are not important. They are important.
This is brilliant in the sense that we are getting a huge range of views, and we're getting them on social media as well, which is fantastic. And I'm just going to go to our the audience on the live stream now, because we've got lots of comments coming in about the false dichotomy. John Leach and others making the point that both skills and knowledge are needed, as we've heard from the panel too. We've got lots of debate on the question about teacher autonomy and teacher knowledge. Graham Ayer asking, if we leave teachers to have more say over the knowledge that's taught, this will create different knowledge being taught in different schools and possibly within schools. Does that matter? And Muriel Askew making the point, teachers don't necessarily have the power or opportunity to take back control. We're often not empowered to do what we know is right for our pupils. So these wider contextual questions coming into play all the time. Comments that we're preaching to the converted and that the government needs to listen, although again they'd be listening to a range of views, I think. And questions about whether we should be empowering students as inquirers critically in terms of philosophy and so on as well. And we did a Twitter poll at the beginning before this debate. the question was, does the knowledge of facts automatically lead to greater wisdom? Answers for yes was 22%, answers for no was 78%. So I think certainly in terms of supporting a greater balance, there seems to be a strong impetus there. We've probably got time for just a couple of very short questions and quickly answered. I know there were some original hands up. The gentleman at the front here has been waiting. The lady here on the second row, and then we'll go right to the back for a hand. If we can keep the questions short and answers short, that will help.
Yeah, so I'm a Brampton student. I believe that the educational system and exams are more focused on what grade we get rather than the knowledge we learn. From a personal perspective, I drive towards getting a better grade than learning the knowledge that, and it's sort of like a competition rather than a drive for knowledge. And I want to ask, what are the outcomes of this in this generation, and how can we change it so that our educational system is more focused on giving us the understanding of knowledge rather than a push and pressure towards getting a grade or mark?
Thank you very much. And the next question here.
Yes, I'm Lola Ramukan. I'm a quality education specialist, so my focus is on quality curriculum. To what extent do you think the hidden curriculum should become more apparent in education planning, especially by teachers, and not relegated to clubs and societies and guidance counselors?
Thank you very much. And then right at the back, the lady with her hand up.
I'm Julia McGowan. I'm a school governor at a primary school in Brixton. I just wanted to know about the point about wisdom, that you're emphasising the link to careers and what the careers kind of big employers are looking for in people, and whether that represents the kind of wisdom we should be teaching or encouraging amongst pupils, or really is there another type of wisdom? We don't have to be dictated by accounting firms in what we're aspiring to.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so more great questions, and the first one is about the drive to competition. Perhaps we could start with you, David, on that.
Yeah, of course you're interested in the grades you're going to get, and that's going to be a very, very big motivating factor. But what I'm advocating is that the information and the relatively inert knowledge that you need to absorb in order to reproduce in an exam is not the kind of knowledge-rich curriculum I'm interested in creating. I'm interested in creating a curriculum where in order to prepare for the exam, you will be engaged in trying to understand the knowledge, where it comes from, the kind of arguments that go on within specialist communities, whether they're in mathematics or physics or geography, about what constitutes the truth. And I think all children can be engaged in those sorts of discussions. And without that sort of insight into where knowledge comes from and how we give it its warrant, I don't think you can be educated.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Tony, you argued that the arts are important and increasingly dominated by elites, but then intimated that maybe they should be pushed to clubs. I think you can try and answer Laura's question.
Well, I mean, push to club. I mean, we have a strange situation where the PFI arrangements mean it's hard for schools to stay out, stay longer. But overall, I do think that there's something about that club system that actually works for lots of people. And the fact that it builds confidence, and I'm talking about clubs that are run by the students themselves, and subject-related clubs as well. But no, my point is about the fact that I do think that schools need to look at this thing around wisdom in terms of also confidence building, and teachers maybe should be seeing themselves more like shepherds in a way, kind of helping the development and actually an understanding of child development as well within that, and understanding at what points they need to intervene in the child's growth. I do think that's important, but the question really still remains that I think that the extracurricular space is as important as the mainstream, and I agree with you there that we can learn from both areas. But it's not a case then that we do away with this whole idea then that at the core curriculum still stands and core knowledge is still inside that, and children need to know what those core things are before they can move to the next step. I just think that's just good teaching, that's good practice.
Thanks, Tony.
Can I just respond to one thing?
You know, because we don't have time. Sorry. And I'm going to ask you to respond on the challenge about basically human capital and you know, putting the needs of employers first. How would you respond to that?
Well, in a way, I'll end where we started. Employers are not the be-all and end-all. There's an education about wisdom, and there's an education about how you lead a fulfilling life, irrespective of employers. We're not just churning out people for employers. But employers are beginning to look beyond the exam piece of paper because they know how narrow it is. And I sort of resent this idea there's some liberal conspiracy to stop poor people getting a traditional education where they should all be doing Latin and stuff. I don't think that's high challenge. Don't think being locked in that top box of the 9 that I've drawn and not having, I think a high challenge education is making all of those 9 really expansive and really challenging. And I don't actually think that GCSEs are particularly challenging. So I think we can do better. We can raise the bar higher for poor kids and for everyone else, and that's what I'm looking for. And I think the best employers are looking for that and saying we want someone who can think really well but has got the emotional intelligence and can problem solve. And if schools are only churning out people who can do well in exams and not those other 2 things, then employers won't be happy. But more importantly than whether employers are happy, I don't think the young person is going to lead a fulfilling life, because I think the 3 things in combination actually matter to what we value in our own lives.
Colleagues, we're coming back again and again to the purposes of education and then, of course, what that means for the curriculum. And as we know, these debates are very long-standing and they will go on, and hopefully they will go on your journeys home and over a coffee this evening. But we've had a fantastic provocation and stimulation this evening, and I hope you'll join me in thanking our panel, and thank you again for your questions.